colleagues online. Are we all in now?
Yeah, yes, Dr. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much. So I guess this is the last session of the visual conference. Yes. So we will quickly move on to welcome our guest speaker for this last session. It's distinguished Professor Jim Unah from University of Lagos, and then his keynote address will be on phenomenology in the context of development in Africa. And so he has 10 minutes to speak to us. Then we'll move on to lectures from other two guests.
20 minutes, not 10 minutes.
Professor Jim.
Okay.
Prof, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me also thank Amara, and that's Dr. Chimakonam, for inviting me to present a keynote lecture in this important conference. My topic is on phenomenology in the context of development in Africa. Because of time constraint, I would just want you to listen to me because it's not on PowerPoint. So I want you to listen to the abstract and then form your opinion. Then I just talk briefly on the other subsections of the paper and then come to a conclusion. Now, my past works on phenomenology, I could discover that there are attitudes to things and lived experience among Africans that one could aptly describe as phenomenological. This disposition or attitude to things and lived experiences is what I intend to buy into or leverage in the conversation on development in Africa. Mainstream phenomenology, developed by Edmund Husserl and his associates, teaches that the raw data of experience, undiluted by theoretical elaborations and preconceptions, is the foundation of genuine experiencing and understanding of the world. It also teaches that the raw data of immediate givenness or experience grants access to apodictic certainty or the essences of things. So I contend that imported ideologies in the development discourse, including alien economic blueprints that do not spring from the African life world, not aligned with what the people see, think, and feel, are a hindrance to Africa's development. And I'm taking a cue from the more radical existential phenomenologies after Husserl, the principle of self-disclosure of entities, self-affirmation, self-actualization, the principle of letting beings be, the principle of live and let live, are dispositions that appear native and central to many African communities. And this is the clue to sustainable development and human flourishing in Africa or in modern Africa. Development is not about presenting cold statistics as we find it in the public space today. It's not about cooked up inflation percentages. It's not about gross domestic product figures, that's GDP figures, only on paper. It is about human development index, about life expectancy, about freedom of people to develop at their own pace, according to their ability and capability. Development is for people and it's about people. It's about how the people are faring in the life world. So I need to contextualize this, discuss this within the theoretical framework of existential phenomenology. And now that takes me to the point of trying to understand how phenomenology and ontology intersect in scholarship in Africa. Mainstream phenomenology talks about the natural attitude and then the imperative to transcend it to a more vibrant and robust mode of experience in order to attain our objectivity in our daily commerce with the world. Now, what does the developing being do in the natural attitude? How can everyday human being transform their doing to a more responsible mode of existence? Phenomenology also teaches that genuine experiencing begins in the life world, where the everyday human being lives, moves, and has his being. What does this mean in terms of development? It means that any form of development that does not reflect on or impact the life of the everyday human being, the ordinary human being, is unfit for purpose. Phenomenology also discusses the intentionality of consciousness. The fact that thinking is always thinking about something intended by the subject, not something imposed upon the subject by a different subject. If what is believed to be about must result in genuine experiencing and transactions with the living and non-living environment. Genuine experiencing demands focusing on the entity or object of inquiry to enable the inquiry objectivity of the object. Husserl presents phenomenology in this light as a tool to guide science against error and in arriving at the essences of things. However, existential phenomenology, which I take as my theoretical framework, championed by Martin Heidegger and his associates, takes it a bit further to portray phenomenology as a philosophical methodology suitable for the theme of philosophy, which is ontology, which is being. The subject matter of philosophy, according to this school of thought, is the analysis of being. And the method to achieve a bias-free analysis of being or entities is phenomenology. And I quote, "Phenomenology is our way of access to what is to be the theme of ontology. Only as phenomenology is ontology possible." Ontology is the study of being of entities. And how does the study of the being of entities relate with phenomenology in the African context? Phenomenology lays bare the being of entities or the profiles of entities. Now, every interrogation of being or entity is a disclosure of aspects or profiles of same entities. In the African context, entities are disclosed as forces or vital forces interacting with one another vertically, horizontally, in an inseparable continuum of a hierarchical order. In fact, it may be described as the interrogation of the possibilities of entities beyond the actuality. So ontology and phenomenology are united in the investigation and disclosure of entities. And how does
sorry,
this...
Prof. I'm sorry to cut in. Please, the paper is blocking your face.
Okay, sorry. Yes. How is this connection between phenomenology and ontology in the African context intersect with the discourse on development in Africa? How is development to be understood in the African quest for progressive interaction with the environment and the world? Now, this takes us to phenomenology and development in Africa. But this, I'm going to be very brief because it's lengthy here. Now, phenomenology in the context of development in Africa is just to lay the foundation to say that there is a foundation in the life way of Africans that looks phenomenological. In other words, somebody has said that the way phenomenology is developed in Western Europe, especially with the existential ontologies, it looks like somebody like Martin Heidegger, for instance, looking at his work, is it's an African, it's a white man, it's a white person, a European, in an African gap, because what he canonizes mode of existence of the average African in his communitarian way of existence in pre-colonial era. I'm not talking of the modern era where we have been confused by colonial interruption and disruption of our life ways. Now, so phenomenology has laid the background. Ontology is our understanding of our own environment, that being is us, forces interact, both vertically and horizontally. Some relate with higher forces, lower forces. And the entities in the environment are dormant forces with the activation or with their activation by superior forces. So if you leave the material environment, a raw material environment, without activating them, you will not be able to, arrive at the kind of development that will provide meaningful existence for members of your African community. Now, there are development ideologies that Europe. So that continued until the end of colonialism, or the end of physical colonialism. Because after the end of physical colonialism, what do you call it now? Psychological, economic, social colonialism continued, and that's what is described today as neocolonialism. Now, with neocolonialism, nothing has changed. Neocolonialism simply means African elites stepping into the shoes of the colonial masters. In terms of development model and trajectory, nothing has changed. It's just somebody stepping into the shoes of the white men that have left. What do I mean by this? The dislocation of African population in the Berlin Conference, nothing has changed. It has not been corrected. Confused arrangement of population is still going on. If you go to many African communities, you see people that speak one language and they are meshed together with other people that don't speak the same language, and they say they are a state or they are a local government. It's creating problem everywhere. And African leaders have not sat down to deal with this problem. And that is the leverage the colonial masters use to continue to dominate, to continue to exploit Africa through these black leaders in white orientation, so to speak. They use the Western social science to produce economic blueprints, economic models that are not fit for purpose, that cannot enable Africans to tap their resources and develop their environment. For instance, this structural adjustment program is an imposed development model, and we have seen that it has not worked in most of Black Africa. And that is because the confused arrangement of communities created puppet leaders who dance to the tune of European masters. And so they do what they dictate for them to do, and they leave the development of our environment. Somebody was speaking about the external environment that we relate with. If the external environment is unhealthy, how can the internal individual be healthy and be focused in the discharge of his responsibilities in imparting knowledge, for instance, to the next generation of Africans? So there's a huge problem there until we reconfigure African demography, and this is going to happen, and it can happen, through referendum. The North and South Sudan, I think they fought themselves silly for over 20 years, and later they agreed that they have to go their separate ways. Remember the amalgamation of Southern and Northern protectorates in Nigeria. Remember what is going on, recall what is going on in Nigeria, and see whether anything has changed, if it is not the confusion created by merging these two disparate communities and culturally disparate communities together that we are suffering from today. So it makes it easy for the colonial masters to exploit us, because there is no consensus, amongst the elites about the trajectory of development to follow. So the first task is to dismantle the colonial demography, created right from the Berlin Conference, 1845, so that communities through referendum can be brought together as homogeneous entities. Let people live the way they want to live. That is the phenomenological spirit. Anything to the contrary is an imposition, and it will not work. It's not about preaching. Preaching does not get to the interior of the human being who knows that he is sequestered from his kids and kin and is treated not as a human being in the environment where he is now located. So the basic problem is the restructuring. Some people call it restructuring or configuring the African demography. And this is to be done within the internal countries of the different nation states of Africa, through referendum. And there are agitations, all over the place, talking about self-determination. That is the first step. And having taken the first step, you now come to look at development. Is it about ideologies? We've transited from socialism and capitalism to something like welfareism, but we are now talking today about a development model that is phenomenologically guided. And that development model, it does not impose anything on you. It talks about sustainable development goals. You set your own goal, and you agree that the goals are good for your citizens. Then go and implement them. At the end of each period, the peer review mechanism will look at what you have done and say, oh, this is your scorecard. You've attained 50% performance, or you have not performed. Why did you not perform? You know, this is the way to perform. This is the trajectory for meaningful development. And then these sustainable development goals are from, tailored to suit developing nations because they made input into it. And then African Union took it over and organized its member states. Create your own national plan of action. Create your own budget, annual budget. Tell us what you want to do according to your ability and capability. Then go ahead and do them. For instance, out of school children at the time was about 10 million in Nigeria. But the Nigerian state that has keyed to reduction of, enrollment of the girl child and more increased enrollment of young people in schools created situations in the country that led to internally displaced people, moved away from their communities, their children dislocated from education. So you're now talking about over 20 million internal out of school children in Nigeria. How is that government working towards sustainable development goals? Look at the SDGs from 1 to 17. Which one are they pursuing vigorously? And you say, okay, they have dealt with infrastructure. Okay, they are dealing with education, or they are dealing with health. Look at the National Assembly of over 109 or something members. You have only 4 women.
Prof, you have 5 minutes more?
Yes, you have only 4 women. That's why I say this is a large topic. So what are African nations states doing to key it into the development agenda that they created? This is no longer an imposition from the West. It is your decision that this is good for our citizens. Let us get them done. And then you turn around and do the opposite. So there is that leads me to say there's a big problem that people don't understand. Although we talk about it glibly, the problem is that there is something wrong with the thinking and the acting of the average African leader. So you need to recalibrate that through the curriculum, because you can only be shouting and fighting the political elites, but you are talking of the future generation of Africans. How do you take them away from this mindset where people will say something that is beautiful to hear according to global best practices, and you turn around and do the exact opposite, and everybody is complaining, and there is no change? So we need to reject the curriculum. If we are talking of future, we need to reject the curriculum to introduce what is this phenomenological ethics of authenticity. Authenticity as an existential virtue. And then, critical thinking. Let us connect our action, to our thoughts. So whatever we say we want to do, we should be able to move our body and our materials to do them. Because before we agree that they are good to do, they are good for the development and well-being and flourishing of the members of society. Why do those African leaders say one thing and do another? So if we are thinking of the future, there is a need to look at the curriculum and teach those subjects like mathematics and physics, because the human individual is more critical in the arena of development. You can speak all the grammar you like. If the mind is disoriented, there is nothing you can do. They will say one thing and go and do another, and everybody will complain. So I think that is the main point I have in this paper, that first, we need to restructure the African state. That is, individual countries listening to the hue and cry of their people about restructuring, deal with that, and then, tap your resources with the materials you have and develop your people, because development is for people and it's about people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that thought-provoking and very engaging presentation. Thank you very much. We will keep our questions coming later, but right away we want to go to our first talk of this section. And